The invitation to appear on the talk show was a significant moment for James Carter, the CEO of a rapidly growing tech company that had garnered attention for its groundbreaking work in renewable energy. Over the last few years, his company had transformed from a modest startup into a leading force in the industry, making headlines for its innovative products, partnerships, and its strong commitment to social impact. James had worked tirelessly to build a business that not only provided cutting-edge technology, but also focused on sustainability and social equity. He was proud of the work his company did, but he knew that as a Black CEO, the journey had been far from easy. When the invitation arrived, James felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Appearing on the talk show was an opportunity to showcase his company's success to a wide audience, but he knew that the host, Adam Price, was known for his sharp tongue and provocative questions. Price had built a reputation for questioning the success of his guests, often implying that certain people had only achieved their positions due to circumstances beyond their control. It wasn't uncommon for him to poke fun at the idea of diversity in the workplace, making bold claims that minorities often succeeded because of social quotas rather than merit. This was a reputation that made many guests wary, especially those from marginalized communities. James, however, believed in his ability to handle whatever questions came his way. He had dealt with his fair share of skepticism in the business world, and he wasn't afraid to speak the truth. His team had worked tirelessly, and the company's accomplishments were the result of hard work, determination, and vision. But when he arrived at the talk show studio, he immediately sensed a shift in the atmosphere. Price greeted him with a forced smile, and the cameras were already rolling. As James sat down across from the host, he noticed the slight smirk on Price's face, as if he already knew the type of narrative he intended to create. The conversation began with the usual pleasantries, but it quickly took a turn. Price started asking questions that seemed designed to undermine James's achievements. He leaned forward, his tone laced with skepticism, and said, "James, your company has grown exponentially in just a few years, and I have to ask, how much of that success do you owe to the current focus on diversity in the tech industry? Do you think your race played a part in your rapid rise, or was it purely about the business itself?" The audience chuckled nervously, sensing that this wasn't going to be a standard interview. James, though taken aback by the question's audacity, remained composed. He knew that this was where the real challenge would begin. He had faced similar questions before, but now, with a national audience watching, it felt like more than just an interview. It felt like a test of his resilience. As Price continued to press on, James began to realize that the host wasn't interested in a genuine conversation about his company's success. Instead, Price seemed more eager to reduce it to a narrative about race and privilege, rather than acknowledging the effort, vision, and leadership that had fueled it. As the interview progressed, it became increasingly clear that Adam Price was more interested in challenging James Carter's legitimacy than actually learning about his business. After his first pointed question about diversity and race, the host continued with a series of leading remarks that subtly suggested James's success was not solely the result of his own efforts, but rather the result of diversity quotas or affirmative action programs. "Tell me, James," Price said, leaning forward with a smirk, "do you think your company's rapid growth is because of your innovative products, or could it be that the timing was just right, given the emphasis on diversity in the business world today?" His voice was laced with skepticism, as though he was trying to imply that James's success was tied to something other than his ability and hard work. James, though seasoned and composed, could feel the tension building. It wasn't the first time he had been questioned about his merit, but the fact that Price had so directly connected his rise to racial quotas stung. The insinuation that his company's success had little to do with his vision and more to do with meeting some diversity requirement was both disrespectful and unfair. Price's tone grew more cutting with each question. I mean, let's face it, you're in a position that many people in your field might not have achieved, simply because of the way the industry is shifting, right? People seem more eager to promote CEOs like you now. The implication that James had benefited from a trend, rather than having earned his place through hard work, was blatant. As the audience listened, they began to sense the underlying bias in the host's questions, but many remained silent. It was clear that the studio atmosphere had shifted. Some people exchanged uneasy glances, while others seemed unsure about how to react. The audience was caught in a difficult position. On one hand, they were watching a man be unfairly targeted by the host. On the other, many weren't sure whether they were allowed to voice their discomfort or stand up for James in such a high-profile setting. The awkward silence hung in the air, making the situation even more uncomfortable. James, however, was ready. He had been asked similar questions before, and he knew how to respond. But he also knew that this wasn't just about him. It was a moment that reflected how many people of color in leadership positions had been treated in the workplace for years. The deeper he dug into his response, the more he realized this moment wasn't just an interview, it was a confrontation. At first, James Carter maintained his composure, responding politely to Adam Price's increasingly pointed questions. He was used to tough interviews, and he had learned early on that staying calm and collected was the best approach when faced with provocative or uncomfortable situations. He knew that the work his company had done over the years spoke for itself, and he wanted to focus on that. Price, however, wasn't letting up. After each measured response from James, the host pressed further, his questions becoming sharper and more personal. James, don't you think it's easier for a black man in your position now, given the rise in corporate diversity initiatives? I mean, it's not every day you see a black CEO of such a successful tech company, is it? The question was subtle, but the intent was clear: to undermine James's success by suggesting it was a result of external factors rather than his capabilities. James took a deep breath, maintaining his cool. I don't believe in making excuses for success, Adam. Hard work, dedication, and a vision to change the world are what got me here, not some external initiative, he replied, keeping his tone professional. But Price wasn't satisfied. He leaned in closer, his gaze unwavering. But surely you can't deny that diversity quotas played a role in your rise, can you? A black CEO in a tech industry dominated by white men. How does that fit into the narrative of equal opportunity? James's patience began to wear thin. He was no stranger to these kinds of insinuations, but this line of questioning felt different. It felt personal. Price was digging deeper, pushing harder, and his tone was growing more dismissive. The audience could sense the shift too. There was a palpable tension in the air, as people shifted in their seats, unsure of how to react. James, however, had been preparing for this. He knew that if he didn't take control of the conversation now, it would spiral further into uncomfortable territory. He could feel the growing disrespect in the host's questions, and something inside him told him it was time to stop being polite. The subtle jabs had crossed a line, and it was clear that this interview was no longer about his company or its impact. It had become a personal challenge. With a steady, measured breath, James prepared himself for a response that would be more direct, a response that would not only address Price's questions, but also send a message to the audience about the reality of navigating success as a black leader in a world that was quick to question that success. The moment of confrontation was approaching, and James was ready to face it head-on. The moment that had been building throughout the interview finally arrived. Adam Price, clearly sensing that he could push James Carter further, made a comment that crossed a line. With a smirk on his face, he said, "It's interesting, James, how someone like you coming from your background could rise so high in the tech industry. Many people from your community don't make it this far. I guess you're one of the exceptions, right? It's almost like you're a poster child for diversity programs." The words stung, But what hurt more was the implication. Price had reduced James's entire career, all his hard work, to a product of his race and a mere statistic of diversity. James could feel the eyes of the studio audience on him, and he knew this was the moment to stand his ground, not just for himself, but for anyone who had been unfairly reduced to their race or background. He took a deep breath, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the rising tension in the room. The audience was silent, waiting for his response. With a composed yet firm voice, James began, "Adam, let me make something very clear. My background, my race, my journey, they do not define my success. It's my hard work, my vision, and my perseverance that have brought me to where I am today." His tone was measured, but every word carried weight. He paused for a moment, allowing the gravity of his words to settle in. What you're doing right now, Adam, is perpetuating harmful stereotypes that so many people of color, women, and others who face systemic barriers have to fight against every single day. You're implying that my success is somehow exceptional because of where I come from, when in reality, it's the result of years of dedication, strategic decisions, and yes, some failures along the way. There are no shortcuts in this journey. The words were firm, but there was no anger in his voice, just the truth. He wasn't here to make excuses or apologize for his success. Instead, he was using this moment to challenge the very foundation of the host's questions. James continued, "I didn't get here because of some diversity initiative. I got here because I refused to give up. I worked around the clock, built relationships, took risks, and faced failures with the same resilience that anyone in my position would. I am not an exception, Adam. I am one of many who have worked hard to earn a place at the table." The room was quiet for a moment, the audience processing his words. James had not only stood up for himself, but he had also called out the harmful assumptions that still plagued many aspects of society, particularly in the business world. It was a moment of truth, a declaration that his success was not up for debate, and it had the power to shift the entire narrative. James Carter's response to Adam Price was nothing short of powerful, and it didn't take long for the impact of his words to spread far beyond the studio. As the show AI read live, viewers at home were struck by his calm yet forceful stance. The contrast between his composed demeanor and the host's increasingly aggressive questioning left many feeling a sense of admiration for James. He had not only stood up for himself, but had done so in a way that was measured, intelligent, and unflinching. On social media, the reaction was immediate. People began sharing clips of the confrontation, praising James for his eloquence, his composure under pressure, and the way he had called out the harmful biases that often went unchallenged. Hashtags like quickly gained traction, as users celebrated his ability to dismantle stereotypes with such poise. Many pointed out that his response was not just a defense of his own achievements, but a call for all marginalized groups to demand respect and recognition in their professional spaces. The shockwaves of the confrontation rippled across the media landscape. News outlets quickly picked up on the moment, and the story went viral. Opinion pieces were written, interviews with experts were conducted, and commentators discussed the deeper implications of the exchange. The conversation shifted from simply debating the legitimacy of James's success to a broader discussion about race, privilege, and the biases that continue to exist in American media and business. The media landscape was divided, however. While many outlets applauded James for his dignified yet firm response, others critiqued Adam Price, accusing him of perpetuating harmful stereotypes and undermining the success of black professionals. Price's behavior was widely condemned, and it wasn't long before he found himself facing significant backlash. Social media users, influencers, and even some of his former supporters called for accountability, demanding an apology from the host for his disrespectful treatment of James. The negative reaction didn't stop with the public. Sponsors began to distance themselves from Price's show, with some even pulling their advertisements. Several major corporations issued statements expressing disappointment in the way the the interview had been conducted, reaffirming their commitment to diversity and inclusion. As the story continued to gain momentum, Adam Price found himself at the center of a media storm that was rapidly growing out of his control. James Carter's poise and clarity had turned what could have been a damaging moment into one of empowerment, sparking a national conversation that transcended the confines of the talk show. The entire ordeal, while uncomfortable, had elevated him to a new level of respect and recognition. His words had resonated far beyond that studio, sending a message that was heard loud and clear across the country. In the days following the confrontation, James Carter's response became a viral sensation, dominating headlines and news cycles across the country. What had initially been a tense moment on a talk show had transformed into a national conversation about race, merit, and the treatment of black professionals in the business world. News outlets replayed the clip of his measured yet forceful response, and it quickly became a point of discussion in interviews, think pieces, and debates. Television networks invited experts to weigh in on the significance of the moment, analyzing the broader implications of Adam Price's line of questioning and James's powerful rebuttal. The conversation that emerged was multifaceted. On one hand, people praised James for his articulate stand against the subtle racism that often permeates professional settings. Commentators on news shows pointed out that while overt racism may be less socially acceptable today, subtle biases like those displayed by Price still exist and are often aimed at undermining the accomplishments of people of color. Many discussions centered on how black professionals, despite their hard work and achievements, were still frequently viewed through the lens of race and forced to justify their success in ways their white counterparts did not. On the other hand, James's response sparked an outpouring of admiration for his poise and dignity. He became a symbol of resilience, showing how a calm, direct confrontation could challenge ingrained stereotypes and shift the narrative. Across social media, people shared his words, not only as an expression of his personal success, but as a rallying cry for those who had faced similar biases in their own careers. The national attention made it clear that James was not just defending himself, he was championing the cause of all marginalized individuals, striving to succeed in spaces that hadn't always been welcoming. The ripple effect of the confrontation extended beyond the media into the business world. James's company, already respected for its innovation and commitment to sustainability, saw a marked increase in support. New customers and clients reached out, expressing admiration for both the company's work and its CEO's bravery. The public saw James not just as a successful businessman, but as someone who used his platform to stand up for fairness and equality. This surge in support was more than just about sales, it was about solidarity. People wanted to align themselves with a company that had shown such strength in the face of adversity. In the wake of the media storm, James's company experienced a significant uptick in both clients and partnerships. Several major corporations, particularly those focused on diversity and inclusion, approached him with offers for collaboration. His company's stock price also saw a rise as investors took note of the newfound visibility and public backing. What had started as an uncomfortable moment on a talk show had turned into a turning point for both James personally and his company, solidifying his reputation as not just a business leader, but a catalyst for change in the business world. The aftermath of the confrontation on Adam Price's talk show was swift and far-reaching, bringing with it consequences that Price had not anticipated. His once popular show, known for its controversial style, began to lose its shine. The backlash against his treatment of James Carter was immediate and fierce. Sponsors, who had previously supported the show for its high ratings, quickly pulled their advertisements in response to the public outcry. Many of these sponsors released statements expressing disappointment with the way the interview had been handled, emphasizing their commitment to diversity and inclusion, values that clearly contradicted the tone and content of Price's questioning.
As the criticism continued to mount, Adam Price found himself in the midst of a professional crisis. Media outlets, which had once hailed him as a master of sharp commentary, now questioned his ethics and judgment. Talk show hosts, journalists, and even some of his own colleagues criticized him for perpetuating harmful stereotypes and undermining the credibility of successful black professionals. Price, who had built his career on challenging his guests, was now the one being challenged. His reputation took a significant hit, and the public demanded accountability for his actions. Meanwhile, James Carter took time to reflect on the experience. Initially, he had approached the interview with a sense of duty, an opportunity to showcase his company's achievements. But as the situation escalated, he realized that this moment was about more than just him. It was a reflection of the systemic biases that many people, particularly those from marginalized communities, faced daily. The interview had begun as a simple conversation about his success, but it had quickly morphed into a confrontation that exposed the deeper, often unspoken prejudices that shaped how society viewed people of color in positions of power. James thought about all the other individuals who had walked the same path as him, who had worked tirelessly to build careers and businesses, only to have their accomplishments questioned or reduced to external factors like race or diversity quotas. He realized that the way he responded wasn't just a defense of his own success, but also a statement against the subtle racism and biases that were still deeply embedded in the fabric of the business world. The confrontation had been a moment of empowerment, not just for him, but for anyone who had been forced to defend their worth due to their race or background. In the end, the story was not just about a CEO standing up to a rude talk show host. It was about the importance of standing up for oneself in the face of adversity, of not allowing others to define one's worth based on stereotypes or preconceived notions. James had used the moment to challenge those biases, and by doing so, he had sent a message that resonated far beyond that studio. The moment became a call for equality, for respect, and for a future where everyone, regardless of their race or background, could be recognized for their abilities and achievements. As the media buzzed with discussions of the confrontation, James reflected on the journey ahead. He knew that this experience had changed the conversation about race and success in America. It had opened doors for meaningful discussions about fairness in the workplace and the barriers that still existed for many. More importantly, it had reminded people that while adversity was inevitable, it was how one responded to it that made all the difference. For James, this was just the beginning of a much larger movement, one that would continue to inspire others to stand tall, demand respect, and fight for a more equitable world.